So my name is Kathy Gradel, and my day job, I'd say this lovingly, is normally in the College of Education at Fredonia, where I teach undergrads and graduate students who are either currently teaching or seeking certification as a pre-service teacher. Um, Low enrollment has wonderful side effects, and I'm sure that we're all aware of this interesting phenomenon that we're in, and John can talk to us about the economics of it, I know. But one of the cool side benefits is our campus has decided that this is a great time to really hone in on our first year efforts to support an interesting array of students with needs and with a lot of talents and interests. So I'm working in the first year program each fall, and then I've been able to branch out to work in our honors program as well. And then this semester, my college is releasing me to the Office of Online Learning full time. So that's very cool and very fun. And I love working with Lisa Milahowski. Some of you know her. So it's great. So now she can say we and mean there are two bodies in that office, which is kind of neat. So I teach online, face-to-face, blended, and have done that for a number of years. So the examples I'm going to be giving you are drawn directly from what I do with my students, not so much in faculty development, but with my undergraduate students at Fredonia. So today's plan, I think, is to talk briefly about both affordances and opportunities when it comes to kind of shrink wrapping our learning management system with one potentially external tool. And I say one because G Suite or Google is not one tool, it's huge. I'll be focusing on just a couple of the apps because we are one of the Google campuses, but on the advice of SUNY Council, our campus has toggled on only a few of our core apps and not everything. So we have very lucratively benefited from using the text version of Google Docs, Slides, Forms, so those core apps. And so I'll be giving you some examples of that, of how I've merged that within the learning management system. And I feel free to ask questions as we go along, even though I have a bullet there for doing some Q&A at the end. So, John, looks like people are on devices, or what? Some people are on devices. One of the things I wanted to start with is, or why not? How is your learning management system, Blackboard, helping you, and what gaps are you seeing in your current practice? This is not like Blackboard on display.
Type it in, or
I'm actually not.
Or I can type some things in there if someone wants
You can
to.
speak up, you can type into the chat. And I'm gonna, actually can't see the chat, so.
So anyone want?
How long do we have?
Yeah.
I mean, but if we're really
Greg,
talking,
you can't have votes on.
if we're talking about the intersection between the learning management system and the Google Suite specifically, I think some of the drawbacks inherent in the learning management system is the collaborative learning opportunities, like collaborative document authoring, for instance.
That's my top one too, Greg. It's, we talk about student publishing and student-centered stuff and effective team building and all the soft skills and whatever. And when we move into almost any learning management system, regardless of the tools, unless it becomes often a teacher-driven model and a content delivery situation.
Right.
Yeah. Anything else working or not working? Strengths and gaps?
I don't know where to start.
Well, I mean, we know, from an instructivist pedagogical perspective that the learning management system has its advantages as a command and control mechanism of tracking learner activity progress. So it does give us dashboard capabilities that I think are helpful in informing our view of learner progress.
But you figure the only real main collaborative tool that Blackboard has is Collaborate. And
Right.
which is, don't get me wrong, that's a really nice tool. The Ultra version is much nicer than the old one. But again, going back to what Greg said and everybody else has said, when you try to allow students to collaborate, and that's a big thing now with a lot of faculty wanting students to do group work, you've got to take it outside of the LMS in order for that to happen.
Right.
Or they have to have two different windows where they're dealing with conversation in two different ways. Where they're maybe dealing with Google Apps and using Docs to write, but maybe they have a discussion forum within their group. So it's really clunky for our students as well as our
to create sort of a unified environment.
Yeah.
A seamless environment would be the goal. Where was I going to go? You just gave me something else to go on there. Like I said, how long do we have? Sometimes you actually encounter faculty who are really forward-thinking and want students to actually collaboratively build the course content with them in kind of a discovery learning mode. And, it's super easy to do that in Google Docs, and it's almost impossible because to create user permissions in the LMS to make a student an author, if you will, in kind of an unrestricted sense.
Right, and you almost have to do it then in almost like a wiki mode.
Yeah. Which
is not the nicest way to do it within the LMS.
And I would say the LMS equivalents tend to be, I wrote in the chat weak, right?
Weak, absolutely.
Yeah,
I
like that.
I mean, that's a nice way of saying
yeah.
they're there. And then we get skillful in all of our workarounds to try to make them have more rigor than John, I took your job over. Can you tell?
I mean, I think those are key. I think, the other thing that's really key is the notion of ownership of learning. And if we think about ownership of learning, to me, there's a construct that means I can retrieve the artifacts of my learning when I need to. And the LMS, in our academic policy world, absolutely doesn't allow us to do that. You only have access to that content during the duration you're enrolled in that course.
You guys are going to laugh. I think you're going to LOL if you're not already in the Haiku Deck, but I came up with some examples, and I'm hoping that you're going to laugh out loud about, I think that we're probably on the very, very same page as far as all the thinking. I'm going to flip to, I'm going to share screen again. And the only thing I think that didn't just come up was accessibility. Sometimes the LMS is.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, we're trying to raise awareness with everyone about why accessibility should be first as we're creating things.
Yeah. And of course, for some faculty, the issue of that, what you brought up, the monitoring and the grading, if you will, is the most important thing to them as compared to the other. And then I captured your really what's missing things. I, honest to God, didn't just type this while you were talking.
I love the ability.
I can see that.
That's a great. And that's it.
I love making up words.
No, and number 4,
Yeah.
there it is.
Right.
So we are on the same page.
Well, I see number 3, especially. I graduated in the spring with my master's, and I was working on a project that we're submitting to be published. And now I'm gone, so if it was on Blackboard, I would have no longer access to it. But the fact that we use Google for it allows me to stay constantly updated or update to it.
Yeah.
Mhm.
It becomes a living project, a living document.
Mm-hmm.
Right. We find, even though we're a Google campus, of course, our ITS people are trying to move us over to Microsoft every other day. But we're finding that so many things, even though the main toggle is on, other things are off. So, for example, some of the extensions that may use data in any way, however you like revision history, as an example, there's a really neat app that does a better job of tracking revision history. That's turned off. So this slide, which is our trying to be effective helpers of learning. I'm not even going to use fancy words, just we want to do what the books tell us to do. Becomes problematic when these other things become the standards of excellence. So I think we are all on the same page. I have 2 standards, very simple standards, although they can go deep and wide. And these are the things that I push like crazy whenever I get a chance to work with faculty on my campus or elsewhere, and with students and with future teachers. And one is a collaboration element and the other is the co-ownership element. So those are the things that I think we should be just, constantly giving the reasons why we do these things. And so under collaboration, I promise I'll stop talking about bullets in a second, but under collaboration, clearly the thing that becomes an issue for across the venues is both the synchronicity and the asynchronicity of the venue. We would need to be able to support both. And we also need to be giving students and faculty options that make sense and that are not so complex that they have to create amazing workarounds to get them to happen. And the other piece, when we're doing really good interdependence work, is we need to be able for people to track what they are doing and what their colleagues are doing. And I mean track in a good way. It's kind of like the world is not, it's my turn, your turn anymore. That's over before kindergarten now. So we have to be able to be more resilient with respect to helping our learners figure out how to be collaborative in an asynchronous world, doing academic work that's not posting on Facebook. And our LMSs fly directly in the face of that. And then, hello. I think the co-ownership thing, I am so wedded to this. And Greg, you're probably laughing because that's one of the things you brought up, right? Is I believe that if it's worth your doing it, you need to be able to not have it live in the LMS and be turned off on January 1st after the fall semester is over. It conveys the opposite message of what we're supposedly trying to convey around lifelong learning and everything else around learning. So anyhow, I have a few examples that I'm ready to lay out to you guys and see what you think. Now, in the, I want to orient you to the Haiku Deck has some examples built into it. So if you're live in that, if you click on the little, looks like a little document associated with a couple of slides, with this slide, you'll see links to some of the examples that I'm going to give. But what I wanted to do, because this is always a question, is so what tool do I use in the LMS? And don't worry, I'm not going to do an LMS whatever, but I'm actually borrowing a course shell that I haven't used for CPD, so for SUNY CPD. So don't get confused by the name of this course, which is called Grant Writing 101. I'm just borrowing that because I don't have another course shell. So just to orient you, all this is a module in the LMS, and so this should look familiar to you. And all I did was set it up as just items in Blackboard lingo and web links. Okay. Now this is not open to you, so I'm not going to ask you to get into the nitty gritty of it, but I'm going to try to orient you to the essence of it. So this would be a task that asks my honor students who were in a digital identities course to first tell me the things that they use to enhance their own personal productivity, the apps, etc. So that's what the task was. This is before I met them, and this was a blended course. So what I did is I said, I don't have a clue if they have used Google before. I could do a survey. I don't want to do that. I want to just get them into it. So what I did is give them directions, and they can read the directions or not. Mostly they didn't. And click on this link to get to the Google slide deck, or I have it embedded here. Let me get rid of this toolbar. I have it embedded in the item or in the page, depending on whatever LMS you're in. So what they did is, and this is not one of the items that I've made available to you because there are actually student names in it. Why can't I get rid of them? Okay. But for example, Hannah said, Study Blue is my go-to. Wow. And aren't they good? They embedded links. I'm going to tell you how I got them to do that. Sarah uses Genius Scan. This is why everyone under the sun should use it. It's a handy dandy pocket scanner, blah, blah, blah. Okay. You get the drift, right? So what they did is use, and I will click to it, a slide deck in Google that was set up for anyone to edit. I don't think I actually made them sign into their Fredonia account because that sometimes is a bugaboo. And meaning they don't want to do it. I do want them to do it, and I'll explain why. But I'm scanning to the end so that you can see the slide. So I just created a master slide that looks like this. So the directions are built in, and it's not elegant. All they had to do then was follow the directions and do it, and it's amazing. For the most part, they did do that. Here's the piece that I love. First of all, they did it. They built it. And for me, this was step one. It was a little assessment for me, and it got me getting a sense of the things that they already talked about and were using. And it became a stepping stone to some mutual support that they were going to end up doing, they didn't know, around using tools for their own growth and to help each other. The other thing over time I asked them to do, and you can see it, I think, in this right-hand side here, if you're not familiar with Google, comments are absolutely the most wonderful alternative to discussion forums in my book, because they can focus directly on the thing, the learning object, the slide, or whatever, and talk with each other. They can give each other advice. They can say high five. They can use sandwich feedback. some of it corrective. They can whatever. And they can continue to have conversations that I am part of, but I am not leading. You'll see me chiming in here and there. Super points. Wow, I didn't have to say much because Megan said it all. So for me, this is an example of something that there are some of my colleagues who would have this as a capstone. Compile a curation, da 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 da. This was actually a perfect way to step into a blended course that had a lot of arms and legs and was low stress, low demand for me, and for the most part, an invisible segue from the learning management system to Google Docs. This can be done even without a domain because you can do it within, the commercial side. So for me, this was is a frequently used type of tool with changing face and content. This same group of people did a bunch of work around their own self-development, and they trained each other on things that they were interested in doing. And then they created little Google Forms quizzes for each other and to get a rating on how they did helping each other. Now, I put that note up there because I don't want people to take these quizzes. These are live. And I want to show you Jensen's quiz as an example. Now, I had 20 students in this class, seniors, freshmen to seniors, and none of them had used Google Forms before. This is the quiz that Jensen made up to see if her colleagues got it and to have them rate how she did helping them find out that this was an app that they really needed to learn to use. They then use the data as part of their own reflection as they move toward their own learning contract goals. So things sometimes merge together with Google tools, sometimes don't. It's all in your instructional design and what you're all about in terms of what you want kids to know, understand, and do and practice. So those two merged really, really well. This was not a huge project in the course, but it was an ongoing effort to take a look at using their phones and their other devices a little more effectively and not having me do lectures about it and presume that I was going to be able to make a difference in what they were doing. So I was willing to let go of the reins, really willing to let go of the reins. And they were very willing to take it up. I have a couple of other more standard examples of where students are collaborating around building content. But are there questions about that initial example? Okay. So I'm going to just shout out if you do. I'm going to show you another really quick example of using Google Slides. I love the slide deck approach because there's a defined zone for publishing. And students seem to like it because they know PowerPoint. Very simple. This is an example of using the same approach, but for a very different purpose. In my graduate class of current and future teachers, I was asking them to work conscientiously on building their personal learning networks. And one evidence of it that they shared was doing this thing called news alerts. And a news alert is something that it's a pearl that you've taken away from some something in your personal learning network, and you learn enough about it to be able to share it with somebody else. So they had to do a couple of these little news alerts over the course of the semester. It could be a tool, it could be a person, it could be a resource, it could be whatever. And I'll click to the slide deck itself. So that's where that view had us embedded directly into the Blackboard area where I published it. This shows you what happens when you go directly following the link, just like you would any web link, and follows the very same format. Students had to converse with each other in this slide deck using comments. This gives me a chance to do something I think that is really important around digital responsibilities, and that is, unfortunately, our students have been modeled to and with about people going in and editing their work. Most of those people are instructors. I say that lovingly, but we talk long and hard in each of my classes about not editing people's work, but instead being able to have the commenting or the suggesting options in Google that let us both have conversations and also make recommendations. So you'll see some of that happening as people go through and make comments in these slides. For me, as a teacher of teachers, it is so important because I get reminded every time a new freshman class comes in, they don't get it. They don't get ownership. They don't get, quote, copyright. They don't get piracy. They don't get whatever. And I think we have a lot of incidental teaching that we have available to us that we're not potentially using. So that's another example of just taking the tool, doing something slightly different with it, and building in lots of repetitions so that students have a reason to go back to it, use it. And I forgot to do that, but let me do it with the study guide example. So from the get-go, we tell students, please make this your own. Please make a copy. And so we encourage people to file, make a copy, put it in their own drive, or print it, or bring it down in whatever version you want to. And one of the ways that I've found students are committed to doing that is when you ask them to build something that doesn't exist, that they want to need to use. I say that lovingly, but you want them to use something so that they can succeed in a course, and usually we're the ones curating it. So this is an example of a project that I use in my undergrad, sophomores, juniors. I use what I call a flat textbook. It's got no electronic supports. I do it on purpose. It's cheap. They can get it used. It has still good information in it. And I ask them to build out the digital content. So they sign up for parts of the chapter. They sign up to handle vocabulary that they have identified as important in the chapter. And then they fill in the template. They do the key ideas summary, hopefully not plagiarizing. Again, that's another thing that we work on as we're doing it. And I'm not doing this to make you nauseous, but I want to get to the various sections of it, and you don't need to really probably read this stuff. They have to define and explain terms and create links to external resources that they vetted. Now, here's the inclination that some faculty do. They'll do a project like this, and then they'll use it to deliver content in the next semester. And I don't do that. I say everybody's got a chance to curate, to learn in this process. I already know this stuff. You guys need to learn it. You need to get good at vetting, reviewing good sources, and packaging it. So this is creating a study guide that they then need to use to study on their own, and then do some collaborative work in addition that happens as the course goes on, and take the final exam. So they do it together, and because Google has this wonderful thing called revision history, and because I ask people to sign into their Google accounts, they and I can see who's done what and when they've done it. This is a feature that we introduce early on, so they all know that we all know, and that usually produces not a, oh my God, but a sigh of relief, because they have all reported how horrible their group work experience was because somebody didn't do their job. So I love being able to say we have a mechanism for doing that. And then this document isn't showing you this because I made a copy of the live one, but they also have responsibilities within the doc at a certain phase to go back and review, not edit, one of their colleagues' work to make sure that their guide is ready for the rest of the class to use. I think this model is potentially very functional for large classes, for non-textbook, but for textbooks of all types and all disciplines. And it doesn't need to be for the whole book or for the whole resource. It can just be for part of it. So I have used this model over and over again for things, as long as I can make sure that the thing, whatever the thing is that they curate, has to be used or should be used at points along the way in the course. Otherwise, it just becomes an exercise. So those are some examples of, and I give them, by the way, free rein in deciding the division of labor and who's doing what, but they do have to sign on the dotted line. And I've, of course, blocked out whose KK is, etc. But they have to do a fair amount of self-monitoring. This course is normally taught as a blended course, but I've also done the same thing in a fully online course of the same type. So I'll pause for a second and ask if you've got questions.
Any questions? Colleen, do you have any?
Nope, all good.
Okay, so we're okay. So one of the things that people talk about with Google is creating docs for people to use and how time intensive and everything it is, or not. Some people have very different viewpoints. And one of the things I wanted to show you was a little trick. I'm not sure that you all know it, but if you don't know it, you're gonna know it now. So pretend for a second, I just went up to the Omnibar and I copied the URL for this document. Pretend for a second that this is not a filled in template, that this is a blank one, okay? So one of the things that 4-letter words are good for in Google language is changing the word edit to copy. I'm hoping that some of you already know this trick. So when I take that URL, now again, I'm pretending for a second, pretend that this is a blank template that I want to share to my class. So in this case, I'd be sharing it to 6 different teams for 6 different chapters. And I'd ask one person from each team to do this. So I'm going to open up a new tab. I'm going to paste that new URL in, and let's see if it works the way it should. Who knows what should happen? It takes that document and provides this screen, which then allows you to basically force the user to make a copy of that doc. You'll notice that it becomes now a copy of that. So it's not the original doc. In fact, there's the original doc. And I now have, that's the URL I put into my learning management system. I don't put a direct link to the template and tell people to make a copy of it because everybody just types into it. So I ask people to type in whatever they're going to type in. So in this case, I might say your name. It could be the team name. So I'm going to say the Gophers. Okay. So whatever naming convention you would normally use for docs, for anything that students submit becomes that. And that little simple thing that you do to make it be kind of an invisible segue to the Google world for a template from your learning management system saves tons of things: time, energy, frustration, the dog ate my homework, etc. Was that new for anyone?
Yeah. That was a new trick, at least for me.
Good. Good. It has been a lifesaver. Now, you can also do change the four-letter word from copy and edit to the real word preview if you want to, and that will take someone to what looks like a more finished version of any doc or slide deck. So that's another little side trick. So I wanted to show you something that I just did this semester. It was what I love about learning management systems is they force you to want to take risks because you just really need to do other things. And so I asked my graduate students to embrace, oh, wow, I did it myself. How about that? To embrace a new packaging or planning template called a HyperDoc. So there are these teachers out in California who started this process of taking a template and having it mimic the instructional or learning cycle that you choose to use. So I'm just going to skim through this for a second. On the left-hand teardrops are going to show you the phases of this learning path. Engage, explore, notice they're color-coded, explain, and it's a long one, huh? And elaborate. And evaluate as well, yes, because they had to do a little assessment at the end. So what my pre-service teachers did is they learned about using HyperDocs as a way to package learning paths. And then again, because I'm so lazy, I took our textbook and asked them to be in charge of chapters. They did this on their own. And then what they did is they hosted what we called a virtual seminar using their HyperDoc that they built for their colleagues. So the HyperDoc model is not magic, but it's a very, very nice way of reminding ourselves how to build not just learning objects, but a reasonable scaffold toward learning a bunch of stuff. And they had to create a hook to engage students with a video or some kind of multimedia. They had to help build background knowledge by using some kind of curation tool. And then because each person was going to be making a copy of the doc, there are response modes built into the doc. So there's a question that gets asked and you get to type into it, etc. They then had to pull out key ideas from the text and build the text out. They could use some things that were referenced in the text, but also they needed to add to it. And this text uses elements to describe evidence-based practices associated with technology use. And then they had to follow through and do a little formative assessment using both, in this case, a narrative tool and Socrative. So I thought the model made sense. I use HyperDocs for packaging some content, and I wasn't sure that this was going to work with 15 students helping each other navigate content that they were the experts in. And I did not want them to do talking head YouTube videos or screencasts filled with slides. So I got an awful lot of, I am so proud of my work responses, but this was an awful lot of work. And that's the, the balancing act I got from every single student involved. What I love about this is the simplicity of it, in the sense that what's underneath the HyperDoc is an awful lot of content. And there's also an instructional or a learning cycle that does make sense. What I love about that is packaging it so that students are empowered to own the stuff, host the stuff, build the stuff, and it all happens with a few, not just one, but a few links and plans in the instructional sequence of the course to make things happen. So this happened over about a 4-week period in the course. It's not the only thing that they did in this fully online course, but it was the last major thing that they did before they compiled their final e-portfolio. And it becomes, the simplicity of it is just a link. However, there was also a link to, these are the directions for compiling your HyperDoc. They use the HyperDoc book as a hard copy or a Kindle version to supplement their own learning, and a third-party website as well that I didn't have to build. So I was so involved all the way along the way, because I was making, this is a demo version. The full versions have comments from me and from peer reviewers all the way along as people were honing their final product. But they ended up being so happy about the transferability of this to their own teaching and learning practice. So it was an experiment. I loved it. And I will do it again, but not with freshmen. I want to show you one more thing, okay? We talked about ownership. I think one more thing. And that honors class that I started with, I walked in and I said, I want you to help me build the syllabus. And I thought they were all going to walk out. They said, type the syllabus? And I said, no, not type the syllabus. I want to know, what are the ingredients that you want in this? This is essentially an elective, this honors course around your digital identity. I want to know, do you want to work on your professional, we have seniors in here, do you want to work on your professional presence in social media? Do you want to work on tracking your own digital footprint? What do you want to do? And so they gnawed away at each other for a long time, and they came up with a couple of core things, but there were all these other things left over that individuals wanted to do. So I said, there is this invention called a learning contract, and perhaps that's something we want to do with the leftover things that can become your individual learning goal for this class. You mean we could do that and get credit for it? I said, absolutely, because this is an honors course. We can do pretty much anything as long as we complete the service learning project that is core to the project, to the course. So one group took it on. They researched learning contracts, and they built a learning contract. They were empowered by the group to decide on the format, and they created this doc for their colleagues to use. You'll notice the magic COPY word at the end. And everybody followed the link, by the way, from a folder that they owned in Google Drive as a class. And everybody made a copy, shared it with me, and then used that as their dashboard for putting links, etc., in. to provide evidence of what they did on their own learning objectives for the course. Those examples are not the things that the course was committed to do. We even figured out the point spread, the amount of points that would be associated with each of the accountabilities for like service learning project versus the learning contract. So this group had very, very little experience with Google. They, as a sidebar, they built an entire set of directions and videos for the campus to use for students migrating from Angel to Moodle. That was their service learning project. So everything they did was bouncing back and forth between our version of Moodle and Google Drive. So that is, I have a few more examples, but I wanted to stop and ask, what do you think? Are these potential applications worthy of some of those bullets that we talked about earlier? Or do they exemplify them?
I think they're really good examples that you provided us with, Kathy. I'm interested in, forgive me if I branch just a little bit here, but given that the K-12 space seems to be embracing the Google Suite, as well as, interestingly, Google Classroom, I mean, do you see, or do you think you'll see more incoming freshmen who sort of natively just know how to use Google Docs because they've already had the prior exposure?
I have a little insight into that because for the last 2 years, for this fall and the prior fall, one of our student learning outcomes for the first year program is prowess, if you will, at least initial prowess with being smart online. I'm paraphrasing, and using some core productivity tools across their studies. So we have been working on it. Here's the answer. Here's one of the answers. We're going to be using Google Drive. Yay! We know Google Drive. It's great. Okay. And I asked them to pull out their phones and show the person beside them their Google apps. So what's on their phones? Google, the search engine, right? And sometimes Google Maps.
Maybe YouTube.
And
And
YouTube. And always YouTube, right? And nothing else. So I say, well, put your money where your mouth is. And before you come into class next time, put on there the things that you used or will use, on your device, on your phones, so that we can start using them in class. And I usually get about a 10% response because they have not used their phones to use any of the productivity apps. So then we move into this kind of baby step. Okay, follow this link. I need you to sign up for fill in the blank. So I do sign up forms using Google Drive. I need to sign up. I'm not going to predetermine teams. Get in teams using this Google Doc, and then we'll go from there. And all of a sudden, and this is across the board with liberal arts, all the way to students that have been admitted way on a lower bar than we would typically come in, first generation college students, as well as economically deprived, as well as honor students. The whole range, very little. So there's, I guess, we've done it is the answer, but we haven't embraced it. So what examples of what I've done with the freshmen we do versions of the Google slide thing, but around other topics and other things. So they are don't know how to use it. It's now not called the research tool, but it's called Explore now in Google. They don't know how to use that to locate a quote, locate the citation for something, locate a Creative Commons licensed image. You know what, I'm making the long list. I think that we have a lot of students who are going to be coming in with more skills, but they haven't come to our campus yet. And that's kind of job security, right?
Well, yes, but on the other hand, you know, if you think about some of the barriers that we have are really having faculty feel comfortable enough and fluent enough that they can guide students in the process as you're doing, right? So if we bridge
Right.
that gap eventually where students come in natively with these skills, you've taken some of that teaching component off of the faculty's load, and I think many of them would be perfectly fine with that, honestly.
Yeah.
You know, in much the same way that they don't really want to teach students how to use the LMS, they have a false expectation that students know how to use the LMS. Right.
Right. That happens all the time because I mean, even
Right.
teaching, you know, like service teachers. I mean, you just assumed they had a certain level of at least understanding how to use the basics of some of the Microsoft tools. And you know,
Right.
I didn't even think of that when I introduced Excel. Like Excel, why would I use Excel as a teacher? Well, there's a lot of reasons why you would use Excel as a teacher. So it's the same principle, I think. It's just we have to stop assuming that they know how to use it for academic purposes. They know how to use it for personal use,
Right.
but they have no idea how to use it for academic.
Right. Yeah, I had on that equivalent of the slide project, I had probably 10% of the class build their own slide decks rather than contributing to a team slide deck and didn't understand the difference. And that's despite, John can verify, I am like meticulous about, you know, demonstrating, modeling, prompting, encouraging. So that gap is still there. What I found, which is not a surprise, we're seeing the same thing in K-12, is I want to do stuff on my phone, but I really don't want to do the stuff you want me to do on my phone.
Sure. Right.
Okay.
Right.
The only hook I was really successful in getting them into was when I brought Cell Phone Jail, which is a Darth Vader candy bucket, to class. Your phone got to visit with Darth Vader if it didn't have the apps on it that we needed to use that day. And then Darth Vader got empty. So that's with the freshmen. So I was trying in many ways, you know, giving lollipops out for for having this stuff on, even if only one member of the team was going to do it. But the one hook that did resonate, which I was in shock over, was QR codes.
Really?
It was like, oh, that's what those are, and they go where, and how cool is that? And I said, you haven't looked at a ketchup bottle recently, or a banana? I mean, what?
Yeah.
You
know, I think you have to, you make a good point that you have to break it down where they live, because here's the example, right? I'm in Nordstrom with my daughter, and we're in, you know, Nordstrom Hell, the half-yearly sale. We're in the shoe department, of course. That's why you're in Nordstrom's. And you know, the dilemma is, can I find this shoe in the store, or can we find it online? And I said, hang on a second. I have the Nordstrom app on my phone, and lo and behold, the Nordstrom app actually has a scanner built in to read the barcodes of the merchandise. And you can find out if it's online or not. I'm like, oh my God. And we both were like, oh my God, this is so revelatory. You know, you've created context where there's utility, you know?
Macy's does,
Right.
do, yeah.
It unlocks that mystery because it makes it personally relevant at that moment. So I think
Right.
that's interesting.
And that's part of what I've always said, it has to be relevant to them in order for them to even use the technology.
Mhm.
So we have to model that behavior and show them, oh, this is why this is relevant to you.
Mhm.
Goes back to
Yeah, instead of like, and it's not just, and the LMS ties us up in that process, right? Because I honestly don't know about the Blackboard app, but I know the Moodle app is not, it's not smooth. It's not friendly. It's, at any rate. But so instead of going to the teacher station and clicking the desktop computer on and having it project on the projector, I started to force myself, and it's not natural for me, even though I use my phone, I use my tablet, I use my laptop, whatever, is take my phone, put it on the Elmo, and project what was on my phone. And do it from my phone so that, and I would say, okay, I am on an Android phone. Is there anyone in this room that has an Android phone? Please open up your phone. You're now the team leader. You can totally match what I have on my, because then I get that it looks different
Mhm.
and I don't have an iPhone. So I would do some of that, kind of modeling. And, but I had to make myself do it. And that was good for me. Not that I don't use my phone, but I don't, I'm an old lady. I really do prefer the larger keyboard so I can see it. But yeah, we ended that freshman course with something that I thought was going to totally rock them. And I'm going to talk about that on Friday, I guess, but where I asked them to use their phones to do some geolocating of spots around campus that they thought would be important for incoming freshmen. So I wanted to borrow from their expertise to identify those spots and then write them up. We used a Google Doc as a collaboration sandbox, and then we nominated geeks from within the teams. They got into that, and the geek became the Google mapper, so that I only had to deal with like 10 mappers. And we used a shared Google map. They plotted the points and the information, and then I sucked it into an app called Wikitude. They then went around campus and tried it out and taught other freshmen how to use it, so that it kind of works like a poor version of Pokemon Go. So when you're walking by, it'll pick up, here you are at the ticket office. Ticket office hours are this, da 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 da. And I would say I had about half of them in the palm of my hand, but only half. However, most of them didn't know how to use their phone to do any geolocation at all. But so that was great. Everybody participated, but I only had about half of them really, really, really excited about it. But half were, so that's great. So we have some job security at Gray. So I guess the thing I wanted to end with is that we always say this, I believe it. You have to know where you want to go with your students. You have to know the end, the end in mind, that whole thing. You need to know what you want students to know, understand, and do before you get into any of this, because otherwise you're going to get lost, they're going to get lost, and a link is only going to take them somewhere and not going to help them own it, learn it, etc. So those ingredients are absolutely essential. So please be in touch. I have contact information in the Haiku Deck, and I'll be putting a link inside the Haiku Deck to a resource doc for some really wonderful, just a couple of wonderful resources on using the core Google apps, if I can say that at this time of the day. So Thanks for weathering the storm and for being here.
Well, thank
Are there
you.
other questions?
Thank you.
Thank you.